Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday. Okay, full disclosure, I admit that part of my topic today was an excuse to show Anya Taylor-Joy's amazing Golden Globes outfit. Holy crap. But it got me thinking, but hold on, come on, show picture. There we are, here we go. This is an amazing outfit. It's actually like a spaghetti strap dress and then a coat over it. But this thing is gorgeous. If you don't recognize Anya Taylor-Joy, she is the lead actress from The Queen's Gambit. That nerdy, redheaded girl. Yeah, that's her. Love this outfit. But this made me like, this is a very plunging neckline. And the first thing I thought was hot. Second thing I thought was love the color. Third thing I thought of is if this was a video game character, people would say she had no agency. And that's what I'm talking about today. The misuse of the term agency when it comes to video game characters, notably female video game characters. Now, if you like this sort of content, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Now, the word agency tends to be bantered around in video games by faux feminist critics as a way to basically slut shame fictional characters and get away with it. The argument is that, these characters are created by men, so we're not supposed to presuppose that they dress themselves, and therefore they're just objects. They have no agency. Now, the tricky thing about this is it's easy to bamboozle people because agency is a complicated concept and there are multiple definitions of the term agency. I actually do an entire college level lecture on character agency, player agency, developer agency in video games and how that forms a triangle. I dealt with this in an episode of Lady Bits, if it sounds familiar. But character agency in fiction is not like the sociological concept of agency. The sociological concept of agency is the ability to basically impact your will upon the world. That's not the case in fiction. In fiction, character agency is the ability to make choices that affect the plot. Meaning you're not driven along by the plot, you actually make choices that move the story forward. Now, there are very, very well-known examples in literature of perfectly good characters who lack the ability to make choices that affect the plot. Offred in The Handmaid's Tale is a character who the significant thing about The Handmaid's Tale is what Offred observes, what Offred thinks and feels about what's happening to her. She doesn't make that many choices because she's enslaved. The Handmaid's Tale is notable as a piece of fiction because the women who actually make meaningful choices in those stories don't last very long. They're the ones that tend to get offed, not just Offred. Offred is essentially a narrator, an observer on the whole thing, and she kind of bobs along, and like I said, the interesting thing is her observations of what happens. So, first and foremost, a character with agency is not required to tell a good story. In a lot of dystopian fiction, it's sort of a marker of dystopian fiction. And yes, there are plenty of men that are the same way. The main characters in George Orwell's 1984, Kafka's The Trial, so on and so forth. Brave New World, different. That character makes some decisions. But, I mean, in 1984 and The Trial, Joseph K. is an example of a character who he just sort of wanders through the story. Nothing he does matters. That's the point. It's a dystopia. So I just realized my lipstick looks weird, but that's besides the point. Just pointing it out for people who are bothered by that sort of thing. But so that's not essential to tell a good story. Now in video games, it is essential that you let players do something, right? Or it's boring. And that's where you get into, people presuppose that women don't dress themselves. But that goes out the window with male characters, even in games like, say, The Witcher, where Geralt is frequently bare-ass naked, and in The Witcher 3, I don't remember previous games, I just remember The Witcher 3, I put Geralt in the dumbest armor I could pick up, because it was funny, and him and Dandelion were bros, and I wanted them to be matchy-matchy in places. But Geralt literally does not dress himself in those games, and you don't hear all this screaming and crying that they have no agency. The assumption is, like it or not, that no woman in their right mind would dress that way. Now, that's ableist. It's perfectly fine. If you're not in your right mind, you can still be the protagonist of a story. Look at Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice. Great character, right? But it is judging the decision-making processes of any woman who would choose to dress that way. Now, there are some arguments that can be made. These are just the wrong ones, right? I mean, to me, I draw the line, going back to The Witcher as another example that a lot of people know. I will defend the utterly ridiculous outfits on the sorceresses till the cows come home, because they are literally held up by magic. Sorceresses use glamours. They can have every gravity-defying, ridiculous, seemingly painful. It's magic. Vess's armor is stupid. There's no justification for it. She doesn't have magic. She can't throw up magical shields when an arrow comes zooming at her. Why does she have a big open bare chest? Fair, right? Valid point. You're not saying the sexiness is the problem. You're saying the practicality is the problem. And I don't know why more analysts of video games, you notice I'm avoiding the word feminism because I don't want to validate that this is feminism, because it's not, okay? This is 1920s Puritanism. Don't show your ankles, ladies, okay? Again, Bayonetta, clothing made by magic. It's her hair. It doesn't matter how ridiculous that stuff is, though I'm still in awe of the seaming on Bayonetta's outfit. I always forget her name. Mari Shimamuke? I always forget her last name. She's an amazing artist. And the way she made the seams and the zippers, and it was actually clothing design. You could tell a woman designed that suit, because I could actually see, okay, this is how it would be made and this is how you get into it. And so the model they had when Bayonetta was being previewed at E3, it was like so amazing. She looked so good because the costume can actually be worn in real life. Now, again, is realistic clothing a prerequisite? Not necessarily. It depends on the game, right? If you have a realistic setting, then yeah, the clothes should look practical, right? But if you're in, say, an anime game or any Japanese art or any form of art, surrealist, so on and so forth, that intends to displace reality instead of reflect reality, Bob's Your Uncle go nuts. That's why that it's not practical really doesn't apply in fighting games. The whole point is it's stupid, right? Like, show me a guy's armor in fighting games that's practical. Even those giant shoulders on, the Lin Kuei in Mortal Kombat get ridiculous sometimes. As somebody who adapted, I don't know, Shao Kahn is not Lin Kuei, different. But as somebody who made replica Shao Kahn armor for Shao Kahn in boss fight, that shit's impractical. Like, that stuff bobs around like you have wings, okay? You can't walk through I had to go sideways through doors. Even with all the strapping on, you move. There was resistance. Like, it screws your aerodynamics. It's ceremonial armor. Okay, nobody would fight in that. It's dumb, right? Fine, it's all dumb. The whole idea of Mortal Kombat is it rips people out of whatever reality, plunks them in the nether realm. Feel free to make that funny, and go for it. You're fighting dudes who shoot lightning and freeze people because mysticism. You're not supposed to ask these questions, right? Moving over to more realistic games, then you get into arguments like it doesn't really matter how certain characters in, say, The Last of Us 2 would be dressed. The idea that they'd let Mel, the pregnant lady, anywhere near danger anywhere is not realistic, and it's not feminist. It's just stupid. It is not strength to put a child who like your unborn baby past a certain amount, right? Like, if she was very far along pregnant, so her baby's at the point where baby is baby can feel pain, baby not just a collection of cells anymore, right? And her intention was to carry that kid to term, so the kid can't protect itself, right? She has to be responsible for the being that has no agency. This is not a pro-life stance. You're hearing me, right? The intent was to carry the child to term. If she wanted to have an abortion, that's totally fine. But in this world, we need more people. That's your primary job. And to put her like, oh no, you're not going to tell me what to do. That's not feminism. That's not empowerment. That's fucking stupidity. Now, could you say, well, people are stupid in real life? Yes, but that was a pretty tightly controlled paramilitary organization. They had to get approval for everything, so they got in trouble. Who authorized that? Right? Who authorized that? It was stupid. It's not feminist. It's dumb. It's making masculinized power, the masculine paradigm of choice, the only viable form, the only acceptable form, the only strong form. And that's actually sexist. Like, this idea that only men and the masculine sphere have agency because masculinized power is the only true form of power, that's a problem. And that's what you end up getting by accident when you're so afraid of depictions of feminized power fantasy or feminized aggression that you try to wipe them off the face of the earth through, internalized patriarchal modesty norms that so-called feminists are upholding, and they don't even notice. I'll give you another example from The Last of Us 2, right? The two main characters, the two characters that have the ability to, more than anybody else, make choices that affect the plot, are Ellie and Abby, right? The two playable characters. They're the ones whose choices are the most meaningful to the primary story, though other characters do make choices. But Ellie and Abby are so artificially forced into masculinized spheres, right? Not just, and you're saying, oh, soldiers can be women too. That's not what I'm talking about, okay? Because a lot of women in the military, they end up being, women make excellent pilots, for one. They're not like frontline shock troops the way Abby is, right? Ellie was worse, though. Because and this bothered me, I admit. Instead of showing Ellie and Dina's relationship as two women in a loving, committed relationship together who are figuring out how to split division of labor and everything like that in a conscious way. They just made Dina the girl and Ellie the guy. So Dina was doing dishes and cooking and all that stuff, and Ellie was out there sitting on the tractor and checking the goats, and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is so thoughtless. Like, okay, you want this female character to be strong, so you make her an honorary guy. And again, there are some women that prefer that stuff. But it would be more interesting if Ellie picked up a fucking dish. Okay? Like, why are you making Dina do all that stuff? She just had a freaking kid. No, she may want to. Oh, all of a sudden, a fictional character has agency when people decide to defend the predetermined characters that they like because there is not a shred of cleavage anywhere. And of course, then you get into Abby, who is overtly sexualized as a character, and yet strangely, no one complains about that. Sex is, for most people, I get that there are fetishists out there, I'm not judging here, but for most people, sex is a private act. You can show everything that was essential to the plot in that sex scene in The Last of Us 2 without showing Abby's breasts. That added nothing. That was because Neil Druckmann wanted to show her boobs. That added nothing. It didn't add anything to her relationship between her and Owen. It didn't advance the plot at all because, there was no identifying mark or anything like that was revealed through that shot. It was shameless TNA. I could make a joke about it being a lowercase t, but I won't, right? We can't all be as blessed as moi. That's a joke, okay? I was going hot on Anya Taylor-Joy earlier, right? She's not built like me, so I'm cool that way. But this is so not what they claim it to be, to the point that I think probably a lot of you chuckled as I'm talking about this. And what is happening again? You've got two characters who don't have scary, obvious girl parts, and so therefore they're okay. They're strong. They have agency. They're acceptable. They're good feminist characters. It's not true. Okay? There's nothing more feminist about Ellie and Abby, and I could make a real argument that game is not feminist at all. That game is toxic masculinity with body dysphoria. Pardon the trans reference. It was intended to sort of be shocking based on my very strong feelings about that game. To put it another way, that was a dude writing himself into a bunch of female characters and going dance monkey dance with female characters. And Joss Whedon's work is the same goddamn thing. And people didn't believe me when I was saying this when Buffy was still popular. Maybe they'll listen now, because I was right. But getting back to the idea of there is nothing more feminist about Abby and Ellie than Bayonetta. Bayonetta is very interesting from a feminist perspective because she is, she's an anti-hero. She has elements that are not traditionally heroic. The brilliant thing about the first Bayonetta game is her enemies, the antagonists, are the cardinal virtues. Ding, 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 symbol, symbol, symbol. Really well handled, right? You're playing this game through the eyes of a bad girl based on the patriarchal social norms that gave us cardinal virtues such as modesty and chastity and all this stuff. Like Bayonetta stands in embodied opposition to that stuff. And so many people who call themselves feminist miss that point. It's right there. It's like, oh, a man designed that, can't possibly be so. What I find interesting is that these very people who claim they are gender nonconforming, trans accepting, judge people based on that. You have no idea what a person's internal identity is. You have no idea what a creator's internal goings on are. It may just be that people don't want to make that public because family issues, or it's just not that important to them, or a great many reasons. We can't be trans accepting, we can't be gender non-conforming accepting, and then presuming cisgender status just because somebody's not declared. That ain't cool. The only time that becomes relevant is something like, you know, the Joss Whedon thing or the Neil Druckmann thing, where it's like, okay, this is a guy, and there's no way to not make this dirty. Like I almost said, this is a guy stuffing himself into female bodies. That sounds really bad, but you know what I mean? It's a director masturbating all over a video game with female avatars. Look how brilliant I am. Look what a great man I am. It's all artifice. It's all calling attention to the alleged genius of the creator instead of just telling a story. Whereas you've got, you know, Ghost of Tsushima, all Asian cast, okay? Women over 40, multiple women over 40, LGBTQ plus women, you know, women who toe the line in a very patriarchal society, women who rebel. Like the female characters in Ghost of Tsushima were badass, okay? And the fact that there's no female playable character in Ghost of Tsushima is not really relevant to whether those other characters are good, right? Whether they're well-developed characters. It's a different challenge to create a well-developed supporting character as opposed to a well-developed main character. And the player has minimal control over plot outcomes in Ghost of Tsushima, so it's easier to compare it to a linear work. But just because there isn't a main female character, that doesn't mean there aren't some excellent female characters in that game. And this is where we get into the difficulty of analyzing classic Lara Croft. Because on some hands, you can criticize the character of she's crawling around in South American jungles in shorts. Nobody does that. Fair point. However, most people don't do front walkovers on wet rocks in a cave. It's unsafe. Tomb Raider is an example of a game that wasn't intended to reflect reality. It was surrealist. It was fantasy. Lara's entire movement quality in those first couple games said that. And then we get into the argument that Lara Croft is hypersexualized. And this is its own video on its own. Okay, she's hypersexualized, so she has no agency. She's a bad character, even though Lara's decisions drive every moment of Tomb Raider game. The classic Tomb Raider games, you cannot claim classic Lara Croft does not make choices. Sorry, double negative there. But Lara makes plenty of choices that affect the plot because she chooses every game to go after the shiny. She's not thrown into an experience the way new Lara Croft is, modern Lara Croft. She signs up for an expedition and then the boat wrecks. Less agency, less direct choice. And new Lara, she's younger, yes, but she spends a lot of time just following instructions as opposed to classic Lara, who she makes some really challenging choices. She does things that are really selfish. She puts her friends in harm's way, but every choice is undeniably hers. Her need to know, her need to discover hidden knowledge is what drives the plot of those games. So, even if she was a hypersexualized character, that doesn't mean she has no agency. Lara Croft has plenty of agency. Now, I want to get into this idea that she's actually hypersexualized. I disagree. I think she's hyper feminized. There's a difference. Lara Croft doesn't have sex in Tomb Raider games. Now, like Abby, gratuitous sex in The Last of Us 2, okay? Lara, in the movies, they gave her kind of a stupid love interest, but I don't remember Lara Croft even going on a real date in those games. She sort of just exists beyond categories of sexualization. We don't even know what Lara's into in terms of whether it's men, it's women. I mean, there's some tension between her and Jacqueline Natla. Like, maybe she does swing that way. That's my headcanon. But we don't know, because we know nothing about Lara's sex life. What we do know is she's got big boobs and a little tiny waist, and she's got kind of skinny legs, but there's that hourglass figure. Now, is that sexual availability, or is that hyper femininity? Well, based on the fashions in the 1990s, that was more hyper femininity. The thing that made her sexy was the facial expressions they gave her in box and promotional art, right? But again, it's very difficult to make a Byronic character without it's an essential feature that Byronic characters have this pull, this sexuality that makes them mad, bad, and dangerous to know. And that's why people keep getting pulled into their orbit, even though it's terrible for them. And that's true of every male Byronic character out there too, because Lord Byron was a scumbag. And he liked to he liked to self-aggrandize that way, that he was irresistible. And Is Lara Croft sexy? Yeah. Is she hypersexualized? How? No. Prove it. Do we ever see her in her underwear? Maybe in later games they started giving her costume changes. They put her in a bathing suit in one game when she was swimming. In those early games, it was the set outfit and polygon counts being what they were back then. You couldn't really do clothes. It was all skin. So I'd argue that she's actually hyper feminized. They played up those feminine characteristics, but that was part of her power. That was what made her cheeky. That was what made her something that women liked back then. Women felt empowered by back then, not in spite of those characteristics, but because of them. The same way we interpreted Samus Aran back in the 80s as shoving her femininity in the player's face, so did Lara Croft. Now, does that mean players didn't manipulate the camera on the close-up of the forgot to take the Kleenex out of the box boobs? No, players did that all the time. But that's not inherent to the game. That's a dumb choice a player made. That doesn't disempower the character at all. You could make a stronger argument that the fact that the ragdoll physics were really funny, and so everybody in those classic games bounced her off a rock a couple of times. It's not how the developers intended the game to be played. However, the developers intended for the player to have a protective instinct over Lara, which, I mean, that's paternalism right there, right? It doesn't make any sense. Why would anybody feel the need to protect a woman who's that much of a badass? Right? Lara can take care of herself. They show that from the opening scene, right? When she's climbing up the winter with the Sherpa, the wolf. Like, one interpretation is that she uses the Sherpa as bait to outwit the wolves. It's sort of an establishing the character moment, right? This does not diminish the character. This does not make the character less. This is a central part of the character. So equating overt hotness, overt charisma, and an overt association with femininity, even if it is sexual. Like I said, Lara Croft, if you believe she's hypersexualized, does not take away from her agency at all, because all her choices are hers. She's not forced against her will to do things. Equating feminine sexuality and feminine performance with an inherent loss of agency the minute you seem traditionally an embodiment of female beauty. Like Anya Taylor-Joy. Oh my God, I love that dress. You know, you lack agency? That's horse shit. Because that's not what agency's about. Whatever way she's dressed, does she make choices that impact the plot? Yes? Then she has agency. Period. End of story. Use your words properly. Okay. Hopefully you like this video, which was a lot of humor mixed with good points. Guaranteed to offend the humorless, but that's part of my deal. If you like this sort of thing, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.